psychology. I will be your instructor slash narrator slash grader slash discussion holder slash whatever for this class throughout its entirety. My name is Dr. Christopher Gotti, and I have actually taught this social psychology course over a number of years. And this is actually, believe it or not, the first time I'm going to be doing it in an online format, even though a vast majority of my classes these days are now online. So let's get started and kind of go over what we're going to be covering in this first module. And that way, hopefully, you'll have a better lay of the land after we've gone through this first presentation. Discussing in this first presentation to help you get some clarity. Now, in this first video, we're going to be covering kind of the gist of what we're going to be doing for this class. I know that many of you might be taking an online class, well, an officially online class for the very first time this semester, and I'm guessing that you might have a lot of different formats that you're being pummeled with at this moment. So what we're going to be doing is just giving you a sense of how this information is going to be approached in this class, what's expected of you, and then how I'm going to assess your performance on those items that I'm requiring. I'll also, at the end of this video, give you a couple hints if you need them for how to succeed in this online format, because I know for many of you, this might, as I mentioned earlier, be kind of a new venture, and oftentimes students do struggle a little bit more in online classes than they do in the in-person ones. So hopefully when going over those things, some of them can hit home and you could be just as successful in this class online as maybe you would have been in person. In our next video that we're going to be presenting, after this one, I guess, for the first module, we're going to be going over what social psychology is all about. We'll talk about some of the different areas that are looked at within social psychology, the general idea of social psychology, what makes a social psychologist, and then what social psychologists do to study their topics. In essence, we're going to be looking at a lot of the research approaches that social psychologists use that make them kind of separate from lots of individuals that like to look and explore some of the topics that are discussed in social psychology. That's for the next video. Let's focus our attention now on what this class is going to be designed to do. So what we're going to be doing in this class is breaking up the course into 12 different what I'll call modules. Essentially, it's weeks of material that we're going to be covering. Within each of those modules, what you'll encounter is usually two presentations. Sometimes there actually is only going to be one, paired with a long video that you'll be watching. Chapter reading or chapters that you'll be reading, depending upon the module that we're at. Written assignments just to check your comprehension and keep you up to speed. And then some type of attendance in what we'll call a lecture, even though in reality, it's going to be just a weekly catch-up during our scheduled class time. This is going to be held via Zoom, and hopefully by attending these things you can feel like you're kind of in touch with your classmates, that I'm not some distant figure that you've never met before, and you can kind of keep yourself up to speed by having that weekly pattern that you would have if this were an in-person class. Now, within those 12 modules, we are also going to have 3 exams included. Essentially, what you're going to do is 4 weeks of class material, then take an exam week, then another 4 weeks of class material and an exam week, and you probably guessed the last part, another 4 weeks of material, and then an exam week. Now, these exams are all going to be similar in format. They'll all be exactly 45 multiple choice questions. They'll all be exactly 50 minutes long, but they will cover only their section of material. So I'll have the first exam material covering similar themes that will be discussed again in the presentations, videos, and readings. You'll be assessed in terms of your understanding first with the written assignments. You'll be getting a couple extra points for the lecture attendance, and then you'll be taking that exam in that first section. And we'll kind of start all over and do the same thing for the next collection of material leading up to that exam. You do want to make sure as you're prepping for these exams that you're keeping up with everything. That means not only watching these videos through their entirety, but also doing the readings, watching the videos that I'm telling you to watch while we're going through these classes, because oftentimes in social psych you're going to find there's a lot of really interesting additional information that can illuminate your understanding of something that isn't covered in the traditional lecture format. So essentially, you're going to have all of those things you're going to want to go through, just like you would in an in-person class, which means taking copious notes while watching the videos, really making sure that you understand what's being covered in class, what's being covered in the readings, and going into the exams kind of very well prepared, having a very good sense of the information at hand. If you do that, you should see success on those. It should also help with the success in the where you're going to be graded. You should be significantly better off. Going back to the idea of the assignments, because this is something that I know many of you are just encountering for the first time. Please note that in these online classes, to ensure that students can do significantly better, these written assignments are often included. It's kind of a replacement to big papers or other things that you might encounter in more of your traditional in-person classes. And these assignments do usually ask you to kind of indicate understanding through the responses that you're given. Now, for the assignments in this class, you're going to see a number of questions, each of them having their values indicated on the questions themselves. And these questions are going to vary from week to week just to provide you with some variety and not get us in a rut. Some will ask you for comprehensive summaries of the material, and this is a great opportunity for you to really consolidate the information, organize it in a way that makes sense, and then kind of present it to me in your own words. In your own words is big. There's a plagiarism checker on the class site, so if you're providing responses that are just copied and pasted statements from either the class lectures or online sources, that will be flagged and bad things will happen. So just make sure when you're summarizing things, going over some of the concepts in terms that you're using your own words to describe the concepts, what we covered, and kind of how it was laid out. There will be other questions that are asking you to apply the material to specific situations, or to even come up with things that we call case studies, where you kind of take an elaborate amount of information and kind of combine it in a way to give a very in-depth display of understanding of some of the more complex material that we've been covering. It's really critical when you're writing these things that you ensure that you are providing full responses in these. I know that it is significantly easier to provide kind of quick responses that get to the point and move on. But for me to be able to verify comprehension, since we're not in an in-person format, I do need to see very, I guess, detailed responses that give perfect clarity on what it is you're discussing. Now, it is important to kind of note here that you'll see recommended length suggestions on those papers or the assignments. Don't sweat if you have to go over the recommended suggestion. That's perfectly fine. If you're somebody that is not extremely concise, you should probably expect to go a little bit beyond what's listed in the kind of suggested length of some of these things. The key thing is that you really are crystal clear in what you're covering. And when you do submit these, you are going to submit them online, as I sort of alluded to earlier, and they have to be uploaded in file forms so the class site can actually process them through the plagiarism checking system. That means no Google shares or Apple files. These just cannot be accessed by our online site. And more importantly, I'm also very savvy to how students in the past have tried to do the Google Share thing so they can continue editing stuff long after it's due, hoping that I don't get degraded in time. That's not something that you should be doing. I don't want that nonsense with corrupt files or anything else causing a lot of strife. So make sure when you are submitting these things that you double check that the site actually uploaded them correctly. And if you can do that, you save yourself a lot of stress as we're progressing throughout the class. Also, on that same note, please understand that the Blackboard site will check when you submitted something, and if something's even 1 second late, 1 single second late, it will be flagged as late and it will receive the grade deduction that's actually covered in the syllabus. Essentially, I'm trying my best to help students avoid the major pitfall that they encounter in these online classes, and that's procrastination and kind of falling off. If you are pushing yourself up to that limit and something happens and you're only a couple minutes or seconds late, I know it feels like I'm being arbitrary with giving you the deductions on those things, but I'm desperately trying to get you to not do that. I'm trying to get you to get this stuff done well in advance, because if you want to stay in the class, if you want to get the most out of it, playing that game of trying to get this done at the last minute or even the last hour is really, really dangerous. And there's tons of research out there that suggested that your ability to comprehend the material is dramatically hindered if you start doing that game of trying to get stuff in at the last second. So I know there will be examples of students kind of running into situations where they're turning something in late, even though they think it's a very justifiable reason, and it probably is. But you will still get that late deduction on these things, because I have to find a way to kind of encourage students, not only in this class but in future classes, to kind of avoid that last second procrastination. So please keep this in mind as you're progressing. I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm trying to really help you in this online format stay on task and be successful, not only in this class but in future classes that you might take. How you're going to be graded for this class. The course is out of 372 points. That's primarily a split between the write-ups that you're going to have each week and the 3 exams. The 12 write-ups being worth 15 points each adds up to 180 points, and the 3 exams being worth 60 points each adds up to 180 points. But there is an additional 12 points that I'm including in this class for our class attendance. As I mentioned earlier, you are expected each week during our scheduled lecture to attend not the entire time, but just probably a half hour to an hour or so of the class, so we can meet, check in, cover things that maybe I want to clarify, or have you kind of break into groups and ask questions, or maybe just ask me questions. I'm still a little unclear as to what we're going to do with that. And those 12 points are going to be essentially what you can earn from attending the classes during the 12 weeks that we have lectures. There is actually an additional 12 points that you can earn, because I'm going to make each of these attendances out of 2 points. The vast majority of you, if you attend and are participating, will get full credit for that. I do reserve the right to give you half credit or something like that for ones that you're sort of there on but not really doing anything for it. And in kind of total, you can get 24 points for the 12 weeks of attendance, which gets you that 12 points plus a potential 12 extra credit points that can be added onto your grade at the end. Now, in terms of how this is all going to pan out in grading, I'm just going to be operating on the basic grading scale. So A's are going to be in the 90% to 100% range. B's are in the 80s to 80, I guess 89.99%. On the C's in the 70 to 79.99%. With the upper and lower extremes getting you those pluses and minuses that we have at this school. But please note, I do not round in this class. So if you are at 89.8 or something like that percent, that does not round up to an A minus. But it also means if you're at, say, 70, what is it, 70.1% or something like that, I'm not going to round down that to, say, a C plus. Also on that same note, there is no curving for this class. I know that grades are going to be shifted in lots of directions in these online formats, and some people are going to do extremely well in this online format, and others are going to struggle a decent amount because of the way that this class is going to kind of break down. And just know that wherever you're at in terms of your strength or your kind of weaknesses, you're not going to be impacted by other individuals. Your grade will be your grade, and it will not be dependent upon how other people in the class are performing. I know some of you might be at this point wondering what you're going to need to do to be successful. I've kind of peppered in some suggestions as we've progressed, but just to reiterate some things that I've mentioned, one of the big ways to do really well in this class is to, first of all, do the readings. The readings are very valuable for this particular class. The authors wrote an amazing textbook that goes into a lot of details and provides a lot of examples to kind of highlight a lot of the terms that you're going to hear about, not only in lectures, but in other places that we'll be referencing as we progress. Another thing that's really critical is to watch the videos and take notes like you were in a lecture. I know that there are some students that love this online format because you can pause and take good notes and rewind and really refresh things. And that's a wonderful benefit of this class. But I also know that there are students that struggle with watching these videos through their entirety. I understand it's kind of tough to just sit there and look at a computer that's not moving and hear my voice, which I'm trying to change my inflection a lot, but I understand it's not quite as engaging as having somebody there in person. But if you can, make sure you find a way to kind of power through and watch these videos and treat them like you would treat any lecture. Taking those notes, really digesting the material, and if there are questions that you have, writing those questions down, because that's what those weekly sections or those weekly meetings that we have are really designed to take care of, to kind of answer those questions and clarify things that you might have come up with as you were watching the presentations. But that of course means you got to watch them before you come to those meetings, and you really should be watching them through their entirety, not just watching little snippets of it. When it comes to other things that you want to make sure that you're doing to be successful, working on those written assignments, as I've mentioned a couple times early, is really big. It helps you consolidate the information. It really helps you kind of find ways to kind of express it in a manner that helps you really relate it to your own life. And if you're doing it early, you're going to be able to look it over again and recognize that there's probably needs for edits or tweaks on some of the responses that you've provided. So if you can get those done as soon as possible, that is a really good idea. And even taking a day off, if you get it done that far in advance, can really help you as you're progressing. Last thing I always suggest is just make sure you are really studying for these exams. Because they're open note, open book, many students in the past have kind of come to the conclusion that that means that they don't need to study as much as they do need to in a normal class, but that is not the case for this course. The questions that I'm designing for these exams are going to be more application based. They're going to be asking you to kind of tease out what terms or concepts relate to specific situations. And for you to successfully answer a lot of those questions, you have to understand the information at a good level. You can't just look up responses for each of the questions. So make sure you are prepping a lot as you're progressing through these classes so you can do really well on those exams when they come around. That's going to mark the end of this lecture. Obviously, we did not spend a lot of time covering what social psychology was about. We just kind of covered the course format. And that's because in our next lecture, that's going to be our main focus. We're going to be looking at what social psychology is, how it's unique, and how we're going to be really tackling all the different social psychology topics that are out there. So I encourage you to take a little break, maybe check out the written assignment, and then when we come back, we'll start getting into social psychology. Take care all.